Welcome to the Redhead Reveal podcast. I am Jenn Pinkerton, your Redhead host, a psychotherapist, writer, speaker, the private practice owner of Pinkerton Psychotherapy, and a connection expert. I help people reveal their connectedness within their relationships and sexuality, understanding root causes of beliefs and behaviors that hold them back from success, and assist them to returning to the person that they are born to be before they were limited by trauma, societal or social concerns, or attachment wounds. Redhead Reveal is here to share concerns and questions, provide interviews with thought leaders and friends, and to hold space to discuss life struggles and encourage vulnerability, authenticity, growth, and self-awareness. Today I have a special treat. I've got my husband, Chad Pinkerton, here, and I really am excited because he's going to talk about addiction and his own struggles that he's had with addiction and his own amazing sobriety story. And I feel like as we've kicked off this new guest series that we're doing with the podcast, he's the most wonderful guest that I could have as my first choice. So I want to turn over to you, Chad, to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and give a bio of who you are, other than my husband, to talk today.
Shouldn't I start with I'm your husband?
Sure.
Okay. I don't know, a bio. I'm a lawyer here in town. I do personal injury. I've owned my own law firm for about 20 years. I have a, I would say, fairly successful practice here in Houston, and I handle cases nationally. We have 4 kids together that are all amazing. 2 of them are in college. 2 of them are, one's in high school at Memorial High School, and one's going to be there next year. I'm not really into talking about myself that much, but, I enjoy my life. We have an amazing family and live in an amazing community. And I should add that I've got the most amazing wife ever. So I feel very lucky and privileged to have this little lady next to me as my wife and spouse and the person that really supports me and helps me accomplish all the things that I try to accomplish in life. She's a best friend and a best mate and best supporter.
Well, I think that was
happy to be here to do this podcast.
That was the best bio I could have ever asked for. So on that note, today we want to talk about addiction. And from a psychotherapy lens, there's a lot of people that struggle with addiction or tendencies, and some people are not at the stage of stating that they have an addiction. Some people are in a full-blown place of addiction. Some people are in a place of recovery. But at whatever position someone is with this struggle, it's something we see so regularly and so often. And when I think of someone that has had such great success and having a really beautiful sobriety story of recovery to show how you can live a life where you're not just sober, but a life where you thrive, which honestly is the best word that I would use to describe you and your life as it relates to really everything, but specifically for this purpose, thriving. And I want to be able to start this topic from that strength-based perspective about how you live your life with that ability to thrive. And then maybe we'll go backwards to kind of talk about the journey of how you got there.
Well, for me, the most important part of sobriety for me when I started this journey 15 years ago was that I was going to live a normal life. I was not going to restrict my life in ways that I see a lot of other sober people do. I know that there's things that I need to do to stay sober, and I do those things on a daily basis without fault. I always do those things. But I also engage in a lot of activities that I guess some sober people would say that are negative or risky or stuff like that. So we have alcohol in our house. I don't want to drink alcohol. My position is if I want to drink alcohol, there's alcohol in every street corner in Houston. So if I wanted to stop and go drink alcohol, I could do it. I don't mind it being my house. I have parties at my house. There's plenty of drinking that goes on at the parties at my home. I go to bars. I go to Vegas. We've been to clubs together in Vegas. We went to a club once, and it was, $10,000 worth of alcohol sitting in front of us, none of which that I was going to drink, and my wife would drink very little of it. So my wife invited a big guest of people in there, and they drank the alcohol. So having alcohol around doesn't bother me, but some people it does bother. But to me, that meant I was going to limit my life, what I could do. Could I go to restaurants and have dinner with people drinking? Could I go to parties? Could I go to Vegas? Could I go golfing? Could I watch football games? Could I go to football games? All these things that I enjoy in my life, I wasn't going to exclude just because at one point in my life they included me drinking alcohol. So that was the main part of my sobriety journey. I was going to get to a point where I could live a very normal life. And I think that I live an extremely normal life. I don't have any real restrictions on what I can and can't do based on the idea that it might lead me to have drinking thoughts or drink. Maybe I'm fortunate, or maybe I just worked hard enough early on to get past that idea that my life has to have restrictions. And I try to live in a way without those types of restrictions.
You mentioned a key point right there, which is that you did that work. You worked so hard to get to a place where you have that ability to thrive in your life. And I think that's really the natural next question I want to ask is, what is the work that you did? How did you get to this place now of 15 years of sobriety, living a life where you thrive, where you've overcome, addiction in that way?
Well, I would say it wasn't easy. And there were failures along the way. I think a lot of people think that you can't fail and ultimately succeed. I went to 3 rehab centers before I ever got sober. It's the fourth one where I found sobriety and found a path for myself. But I failed on each one of those journeys. The first one I stayed sober for about 8 months, but didn't really work a program, just thought I really wasn't an alcoholic or an addict. And I could do this on my own without any help or without a program. That failed pretty miserably. Then I went to another rehab center and I stayed there, I stayed there probably 28, 30 days. I came home, I was sober 18 days and went out on a bender. Then I went to another rehab center and I stayed there for 3 days or 4 days, checked myself out, and immediately went to the bar. So those were pretty monumental failures on my part, but this is part of my path. I had to get to a place where I accepted the idea that I really had a problem and I needed help and I needed to address that problem, both mentally and physically and spiritually. The last rehab center was a change for me psychologically and spiritually. I accepted 2 things, really. One, I was an addict and an alcoholic that needed help, and I could no longer consume alcohol or drugs normally like anybody else. So that problem had to be addressed. And number 2, I had to address the spiritual part of me. And a lot of people are resistant to spiritual help. I found that was the strongest part of my recovery, was that I accepted God into my life and that God was going to be on this path and journey with me. And even to this day, my day starts with a prayer. During the day, I communicate with God and build a relationship with God. And every day, my day ends with a prayer. And that's how I incorporate the spiritual part of sobriety in that path. Some people ignore that, and some people are successful ignoring that. That just, my experience is that that's helped me a great deal.
And that's personal to you, and that's personal to each person.
It is.
About what's going to work for them.
That's absolutely true, and I do say this to everybody. Look, I'm a 12-stepper. I went through AA, but AA is not the only solution, and AA is not perfect. There are many different solutions. People need to find one that works for them and then work that solution. And then over the course of time, once you get some time under your belt, you can modify that. For instance, a lot of people in AA recommend going to 2 to 3 meetings a week. I don't do that. It's not necessary for me to do that. I go to maybe 4, 5, 6 a year. And that's all of the meetings that I attend. I like them and I enjoy them, but that's not a daily part or a weekly part of my sobriety path.
But was it at one point, if I can interrupt, Chad?
Yeah. For sure. Early on in sobriety, I did the 90 and 90. I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. And even after that, I went to a meeting almost every day for the first year. I think it's very important to be around sober people and understand the concepts and get help on a daily basis from just anybody that can talk to you about your issues. And I did that for a year. And even the second year, I still went to meetings a couple times a week that second year. But after that, I think I tapered off of meetings and started focusing on helping others or giving speeches or going to the University of Houston Law Center and giving speeches or working with the people in Galveston, with the people that have been convicted of crimes that need help regarding sobriety. And I started contributing that way rather than just going to meetings. There's absolutely nothing wrong with going to meetings. This is what I would say about that is some people put too much faith in going to a meeting, and that's what's going to keep you sober. For instance, I go for an hour and I listen and I talk to people, and now I'm going to stay sober. That's just not true. Some people use meetings as a crutch. That is my obligation. I'm going to do that, but I'm not going to do anything else. And sometimes those meetings can be negative. And you need to, for me, I felt like you need to stay in a positive frame of mind about sobriety. A lot of times people that are in those meetings are very miserable, and they talk about their misery even if they have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years of sobriety. That's not the life I'm going to lead. If I'm going to be miserable, I'm going to go down drinking and snorting coke. That's not the life I wanted, and I want to stay away from some of that misery, and that's just my path.
Okay, I want to approach addiction from a different aspect too, and that is trauma. As a psychotherapist and what I do and the work I do, although I do not specialize in addiction specifically, a lot of the therapists here at my practice do. And, there's a belief system not only from the disease component of addiction, but also the trauma component, meaning that oftentimes, addiction is rooted in these feelings that something has happened, something has occurred that has created, feelings of lack of worthiness maybe, or low self-esteem, or maybe not being seen or heard, or if there was a lack of emotional attunement and attachment growing up in formative years, or if there were other things that contributed to, perhaps even an abusive environment. Everything is different for each person, and the story changes, but oftentimes there's a running theme that a lot of trauma can truly exacerbate maybe pre-existing problems. They can cause the necessary need at the time, the survival skill of I want to cope, but the coping is done in this maladaptive way that isn't the answer, but it might seem the answer at that time. And that connection to trauma seems really profound. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on how that relates to addiction.
Well, I've seen that a great deal with the people that I've helped or got to know in sobriety. I think my personal issues growing up were not necessarily trauma related to other people in my life. I had wonderful parents and a wonderful family, and so I don't contribute any of that to that. But I will say that when I was very young, I guess second grade, third grade, I was struggling in school, had a form of dyslexia, was put in resource classes, was held back a grade. And I do recall having a low self-esteem related to that. I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel smart. I felt embarrassed. And that did cause some internal trauma, right? And I didn't handle that very well. I kind of ignored it, right? What I did was I focused on sports. I was really good at sports. And I tried to be the best athlete I could, and that's the way I felt good about myself and got attention, right? When I was younger, I also didn't like the way I looked. I could look in the mirror, and I had these gigantic buck teeth that were crooked, right? And that leaves an impact on you. So I didn't feel comfortable the way I looked. I was a skinny kid. I was tall, just a little awkward, right? And I think that led to some self-esteem stuff. And I mentioned that one because it really led to being comfortable with women or girls. And I never got comfortable with that. And then when sports were over for me and there was no longer that arena for me to feel good about myself.
To excel, like to be accomplished.
Yeah, to be the guy. You know, he's really good at football. He's really good at basketball. He's really good at track. When that was gone and I graduated from high school, or before I graduated, there was an emptiness. There was nothing to fill that void. And it was at that time that I really turned to alcohol as kind of that, that support, that courage in a can.
The Band-Aid.
The Band-Aid, yeah, that's a good word. But, I mean, I had started drinking when I was 13 probably, but not regularly. And I remember back when I was 13, I liked it. I liked the way it made me feel. But then when sports were gone and I had nothing, I started drinking. That courage that I would get to talk to girls, because that's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to be able to talk and hang out with females. And I became funny and fun and just having a good time. And the girls liked that. And that continued. That crutch continued and was the reason I drank for a long time before I was an alcoholic, was just to fit in, just to feel better about myself for a few hours, to let down the guard of maybe I'm not the best looking guy or maybe I'm not the funniest. I just wanted to get attention and be able to date and feel normal in that process. And that continued for a very long time. And when you do something for a long time, there are consequences. And eventually I became an alcoholic, and that alcoholism led to drugs, and that led to an addiction. And at that point, I had to get help. That was kind of the trauma. I know that was a long answer, but that's the kind of trauma I experienced that kind of changed my psyche and led to this idea that I need something else to make me feel different so I can be accepted with my peers or ladies.
Exactly. But that answer right there at the end is what I mean, in that, I believe, and the lens I look at life, is that everyone suffers from some form of emotional trauma. And most of the time, it has nothing to do with parents. Most of the time, parents do the best thing that they can with what they have. Often, it's just within us. It's our own feelings of how we feel about ourselves. And that something happens and we don't process that in the way that we wish we could, in this beautifully, emotionally healthy, mature way. And maybe it's internalized, like you're talking about, of low self-worth or low self-esteem, or, having that learning disability or problem that you had at that time with processing information. It affected you. It affected you negatively, so you used something else to have a positive effect. And here you are now, and you're able to overcome that. So when you were in rehab, was there time devoted for you to being able to look at that, to really face those feelings of low self-esteem and low self-worth and lack of worthiness, to bolster that up so you were able to recover?
I would say some. I mean, we had counseling appointments where we talked about that stuff. I don't know how deep I went into that at that time. I don't think I went very deep at all. This is what I will say about trauma and how to handle that. There's none of us that get out of this life without some form of trauma.
That's right.
We're all hurt in some way, and then we have to process that way, and then we all process it differently. And some of it is just inherent to being human, right? I have a
human condition.
I have a genetic composition that has a gene in it that says, look, if you drink a long time and you abuse that, you can become an addict or an alcoholic. And once that's switched on, it's very hard to switch it off.
Yes.
And that's a part that I couldn't control. That was passed down to me. I had no control over that. How I felt about myself psychologically and the way I felt about my appearance and stuff like that, that's really not on me either. I was getting feedback. I was a young kid. I was processing that. At some point, however, I believe that it was important for me to take accountability for my part in my disease.
Absolutely.
And one way to take accountability is to seek help, right? And if you know that you have these insecurities, low self-esteem, self-worth, whatever it may be, taking accountability means I recognize it, but then I want to seek help. And once I got sober, I've continuously sought help at different times in my life where it had nothing to do with wanting to drink, but had everything to do with how I felt about myself. Mm-hmm. So going to counseling, I've done that multiple times during my life. Addressing that with somebody that has superior knowledge to me and talking to them about it, like my wife. Mm-hmm. I don't come to my wife for counseling, but I've gone to other counselors. Keeping a personal list of how I feel. I mean, am I being honest with myself, and am I being true to who I am as a human being? And I literally keep a list. Where am I at? How did I do today? How did I do this week? How do I feel? What are my honest feelings? And accountability really does start with being honest with yourself. And the second part of it is being willing to accept help or seek help.
And that willingness is huge. That's a fundamental part of all of it. And you did that well. You did that repeatedly, and you knew you needed to do it to get help. And the last time it worked, and the last time was so different for you. What do you say to other people who have gone through this pattern of they've tried to get help? They've sought it, they know they need it, but it hasn't stuck. They've reverted back to old ways. They've gone back to old patterns. What do you say to people who haven't found that fourth time like you did that worked?
What options do you have? Mm-hmm. I mean, look, this disease really has either get sober, you're going to be in prison, or you're going to be in a mental ward, or it's going to kill you. So the only real viable option is to keep trying. Mm-hmm. So then people are like, well, I just want to keep trying. I will keep trying. Well, what I find is a lot of people aren't trying when they say they are trying. So you have to have the courage to really keep trying. It's like, look, I want to beat this thing. You don't have to be undefeated, okay? You don't have to be. Everybody thinks, I got to be so perfect. I got to beat this the first time. Or I got to beat it the second time, or the third time, or the fourth. No. You only have to beat it once, right? You can be 0-50 and beat it once, and you're 1-50 in this war that you have with the disease, and you're a success. And frankly, I think you're a greater success, right? If you worked so hard and fought so long and suffered so many setbacks and relapses and losses and failures, and then you finally get it after the 10th try or the 20th try mm-hmm. or the 50th try, I think you're more successful. You were more dedicated and more courageous. So what I would say to everybody is look at your options. There's only one viable option, mm-hmm. and that is to continue to try. And then when you try, really mean it. Seek out help. Work the program. Be willing to fail one more time. And if you fail one more time, just get back up, because there's no other choice. There really isn't.
I agree with that completely. And I think that the dedication to knowing that, okay, it didn't work and I can keep going. This doesn't mean I'm a failure. This means that I'm going to try again. I'm going to continue to believe that I can make a difference in my life and I can have changes in my life. That is so empowering in its own lens to be able to know I'm going to do this.
You're not a failure until you quit trying, right? Mm-hmm. Until they put you in prison or put you in a mental hospital or put you in the dirt, you're not a failure. You still got time. You still got a chance. Mm-hmm. And I've seen people that I'm like, I look at them, first time they talk to me or tell me their story, I'm like, whew, this one's going to be tough, right? Not so sure about this one. But I've seen those exact people be the most successful people in recovery. In fact, I would say those are the most successful people in recovery.
And on that note, as the time that we've been together, almost a decade together, I've watched you work with a lot of different people. and I've watched you, been in the audience as you've done these big presentations to schools or to different events to talk about your sobriety story, to really illustrate to people your level of recovery and where you are and how you got there, because I think your story is amazing, and we don't, unfortunately, have enough time to go through all the bits of the details today that I love so much to hear. But with that being said, I see you give back in so many ways to other people. What do you think about that and how important that component is in recovery?
Well, I think it's extremely important. Look, God gave me a gift of sobriety, and to honor that gift, my job is to share it. I'm an AA person, so part of the program is to share with other people and help other people and give back. But I'll tell you this, as much as I may give to other people, I get way more back. Mm-hmm. Every time I work with a person or give a talk and talk to people after, or donate time or contribute funds to something, I always get more back in return personally. I don't say that selfishly. I just say that honestly. What I've seen over the last 15 years is it helps me stay sober, stay focused, stay in the right frame of mind mm-hmm. by doing those things. Mm-hmm. And I think it's extremely important to be willing to help others. Mm-hmm. God has certainly gifted me the ability to talk, right? I have a lot of shortcomings, far from perfect, but I have the ability to speak. And I do that in my job all the time as a lawyer. I try cases, I take depositions, I argue things in front of the court, and I have that gift, and I appreciate that gift. And I think when God gives you a gift, you ought to use it to help others. And I try to do that on a regular basis. If you asked me to do a math problem right now or help you with your math problem, I wouldn't be able to help you at all. I don't have that gift. But I have a gift, and I try to utilize it to help as many people as I can.
Okay, now, Chad, we're going to get a little bit in the trenches now. I'm going to get really comfortable here.
Should I get comfortable?
I assume you already are. Being sober, having this amazing story of recovery, doesn't mean you're a perfect person. And you've said that, and you mentioned that when you're talking. But I often see that people feel as though they've recovered, they're sober, but their relationships are not in the place they need to be. And they come because maybe they've already conquered that part, but they either, A, are in a relationship and they can't get past all that pain, or B, they're in a relationship that they've gotten past the pain, but there's just still some lingering problems with that. And I find myself often trying to explain is, just because you're dealing with that doesn't mean you're not going to have problems in a relationship. And while some relationships don't recover, there's also just as many that can and will and do thrive, and it's doable. But I feel like a lot of people see things as it's all or nothing, and that they can't have this life where they can have an argument or have a disagreement, and they suddenly think, well, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater, we're done. Being able to understand that just as you put all that dedication in your sobriety, you can also put dedication in other things, and it may not have this perfect ending in that moment. But that is part of life, right? It is part of life. You're going to have conflict. You're going to maybe not handle things the best way you should sometimes, but it doesn't have to be this viewpoint on how you are in your sobriety.
Yeah, I think people in sobriety or people attempting to be in recovery put too much emphasis on that's who I am. Who am I? I'm a sober person. I've been sober 15 years, but that doesn't define me. First and foremost, I'm a husband and a father and a son and a brother. Secondly, I'm a lawyer. And third, I'm a man of God that spends time building a relationship with God.
So that was my point of saying let's get in the trenches here, because I've even been asked, people that look up to you with your sobriety, success, but they say, oh, I bet y'all never have a fight. I bet he's just this perfect guy. And I, of course, say, no, he's not. But,
really?
Of course, because neither am I, Chad.
Okay.
But what do you say to that? Because I feel like that's important to note.
Look, I'm a very intense person, right? I feel like I'm simple, but I'm complicated to be around. I share my opinions. I can be loud. I can get upset and angry. If I don't like something, you're going to know about it. Of course we fight, and of course we argue. That's when you put two people together for 10 years, they're going to have disagreements. And if you can't have a disagreement and successfully proceed through life with your friends or family members or spouses, then you probably need to come see my wife or see somebody like my wife, because you got to learn to deal with that stuff.
Right.
I mean, you got to learn to be like, hey, I was wrong. And I've learned to say that more in sobriety, or I'm sorry, I apologize. Or better than that, hey, I'm going to fix that. I'm not going to do that anymore, and make a commitment not to do the things that irritate your spouse. But the idea that somehow me getting sober changed all the characteristics of who I am as a human being is just ridiculous. I wouldn't change those things. Am I highly competitive? Yeah, I'm competitive. Every defense lawyer in this city knows that I'm competitive, and I'm coming to eat your lunch. And I don't make any bones about it. Do I get angry sometimes? Yeah. I got a fiery, intense personality. You do something, and you're going to hear about it. You do it 2 or 3 times, I'm going to be in your face. That's just a human being I am. I'm very compassionate. Things touch me deeply, make me sad, want me to help people. I do that all the time. Sometimes when I do that, it brings difficult times into my life. But would I change that? No, I'm not changing who I am as a sober person. I'm just trying to be the very best version of myself without alcohol and drugs. And the best version of myself is going to have arguments with my wife. And I'm going to lose my temper sometimes. I mean, I coach basketball all the time and with my son. And sometimes I lose my temper on the sideline with the referees. And people are like, oh, Chad, you're in front of the kids. And I'm like, yeah. And they're 8th and 9th graders. They can handle it. That ref needs to get the call right. And I don't make any bones about it. And I think we spend too much time trying to redefine who we are rather than refine who we are. So, yeah, can I be nicer? Yeah, I can work on that. Can I say less mean things when I do get mad? Yeah, I need to work on that. I'm refining that. But I don't want to change the core person I am, because frankly, I'm pretty proud of that person. I'm not perfect, but I'm proud of that person.
And that's such a great message to give, is that you are imperfect.
Of course.
You know? And
everybody
sobriety,
that knows me knows how imperfect I am.
Sobriety doesn't have to be that. And I think that a lot of people fail in that path because they're hanging on to the idea of perfection, which none of us can ever attain. You know, I have said on a prior podcast that I want everybody to return to what they're born to be, the perfection of being born. And what I mean by that is the innocence of the fact that we have the ability to be and do anything we want in our life. You know, the world is our oyster from that degree, and that we don't have to be limited by things. We can heal from what holds us back. We can achieve the things we want. We have all of everything right in front of us, and it's harnessed within us. And we can make the changes that we need in our life to thrive. And you're a perfect example of that. As we wrap up this, and I thank you so much for coming here and sharing your time today on this with me, this topic that I know is so important to you. I ask all my guests one thing, which is, do you have a question that you could leave for the next guest? And it won't be about addiction. It'll be about something else. You know, I want to change up these topics and change up my guests, but leaving a question for someone else to ask, and you're going to be the first person to kick that off here, because I want to start that with everyone else, because I want these thought-provoking conversations that really force us to have some reflection in life. And I want to give you a minute to think about that.
I don't need a minute.
Oh, okay. Well, then just straight out the gate, what is it?
Okay, so You know how I love TikTok, right, honey?
Yes, unfortunately, I do know.
Okay, so she started it. She got me on
Did,
TikTok.
I
I didn't
did.
even want to be on it. Now I'm
did. It's all
addicted
my
to
fault.
TikTok. Okay. So there's this guy on TikTok. He tells a story of an Indian chief with his grandson. And he's talking to his grandson about life. And really, he's talking to his grandson about the internal battle that people have within themselves. And he says, son, there's two wolves that live inside of you. One wolf is full of love and compassion and peace and humility and faith and caring. The other wolf is full of anger and spite and jealousy and pride and envy and hate. And son, those wolves are fighting every single day within you. And the boy thinks for a minute and he looks at granddad. You know how kids always ask the best question. And he asked the simplest but best question. He said, Granddad, which wolf wins? And the granddad looked at his grandson and said, the wolf you feed. And what I see in my life is sometimes I'm feeding the wrong stuff. And I'm constantly feeding the wrong stuff. So what I'd ask the next guest is, how do we feed the good in us and avoid the bad? How do we starve the bad wolf and let the good wolf survive? And I struggle with that all the time. I feed anger sometimes. I obsess about making more money or having more things too often. I'm feeding things that don't make me feel good. And I think I'm feeding the wolf that's the bad wolf. And I want to do a better job of that, and I've been thinking about it a lot, but I just don't know how. Because the things that I want or the things that I think about most are that bad wolf. And I think sometimes that bad wolf is taking over, is taking charge, it's leading the way. So the next guest, tell me how to feed the good wolf and how you do it.
I love
That's
that
my
question. I love that. Thank you for leaving that with us. And we'll circle back to you and let you know what that answer is at some point in the future.
Thank you,
Well, Chad
honey.
Pinkerton, I sure appreciate you being here today.
Oh, Chad Pinkerton.
As my
Not
guest.
honey.
And my darling honey, who I love so very much. That concludes today. Best and rest.